My parents forged my name to sell my lake house for my sister's $300,000 wedding. They toasted to sisterly love. I just smiled and handed them an envelope. Their faces froze when they saw. I am Naomi, 34 years old, and I make my living bringing dead things back to life. I am a restoration architect. I look at crumbling foundations, rotting support beams, and collapsed roofs, and I figure out a way to make them whole again. It is a meticulous, lonely profession, but it makes sense to me. Buildings are honest. If a support column is compromised, the ceiling sags. There is a direct, undeniable cause and effect. I always preferred the honesty of architecture to the messy, manipulative architecture of my own family. I learned very early in life that independence was not just a personality trait, it was the only safety net I had. In a family that does not prioritize you, self-reliance is the only thing standing between you and complete collapse. My understanding of structures, of things built to last, came entirely from my grandfather, Winston. While my parents, Howard and Evelyn, were perpetually exhausted by the endless, frantic demands of my younger sister Stella, Grandpa Winston offered me a quiet refuge. His lake house in New Hampshire was my sanctuary. It was a rustic, sprawling cabin made of aged pine and river stone, sitting on 3 acres of pristine waterfront property. Grandpa Winston built it himself in the late 1970s. He was a master carpenter, a man who spoke more with his calloused hands than he ever did with words. I spent every single summer there from the time I was a little girl until I left for college. I can still close my eyes and smell the distinct mix of damp earth, fresh sawdust, and old wood smoke that clung to his flannel shirts. While Stella was back in the city throwing tantrums because she wanted the newest designer clothes, I was in the workshop covered in wood shavings. Grandpa Winston taught me how to measure twice and cut once. He taught me how to sand down rough edges until the wood felt like glass beneath my fingertips. He taught me that if you build something with integrity, it will weather any storm. That lake house was not just a piece of real estate to me. It was the physical embodiment of the only unconditional love I had ever known. It was the foundation of my entire career. It was my heart. When Grandpa Winston passed away 6 years ago, it shattered my world. I was 28 at the time, just starting to find my footing in the architectural industry, and losing him felt like losing the ground beneath my feet. A few weeks after the funeral, we all gathered in a sterile, freezing cold attorney's office in downtown Boston for the reading of his will. The tension in that room was suffocating. Everyone assumed the estate would be liquidated, the assets split, the money dumped into the family pot. But Grandpa Winston was an honest man, and he saw us all for exactly who we were. The attorney cleared his throat and read the document. Grandpa Winston left the lake house, the 3 acres of land, and everything inside it, entirely and exclusively to me. He wrote a small note in the will, stating that he knew I was the only one who understood the soul of the house, and the only one who would preserve it rather than turning it into fast cash. I will never, for the rest of my life, forget the oxygen leaving that room. I looked up from my lap and saw the raw, unfiltered expressions on my family's faces. Stella, who was 21 at the time, let out an actual, bratty scoff. Her face twisted into a mask of pure entitlement and annoyance, as if a toy had just been snatched from her hands. But it was my parents' reaction that carved a permanent scar into my memory. Howard, my father, let out a long, heavy sigh, his shoulders slumping as he mentally calculated the hundreds of thousands of dollars he was suddenly not getting. Evelyn, my mother, pressed her lips together so tightly they turned white. Her eyes were hard, judgmental, and entirely devoid of any happiness for me. She offered a stiff congratulations, but her tone was dripping with quiet accusation, as if I had manipulated a dying old man to steal what rightfully belonged to the collective family. That day, sitting in that freezing office, the battle lines were drawn, even if I did not fully realize it yet. To understand how my parents could eventually cross the ultimate line, you have to understand the sick, twisted solar system of our family. Stella was the sun. She was blinding, demanding, and everything revolved around her. I was a distant, cold planet on the outer edge, only occasionally acknowledged when I drifted into their line of sight. Stella was the pretty one, the dramatic one, the one who always needed to be saved. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the ghost. From a very young age, my parents established a clear hierarchy of needs. If there were limited resources, physical, emotional, or financial, they automatically flowed to Stella. When it was time for me to go to college, I knew better than to ask for help. I wanted to study architecture, a notoriously expensive and rigorous program. My parents sat me down at the kitchen table and gave me a long, solemn speech about financial responsibility and building character. So, I took out massive student loans. I worked double shifts at a greasy diner near campus, coming home at 2 in the morning smelling like stale French fries and bleach, just so I could afford my drafting software and textbooks. I built my career brick by brick, entirely on my own. Meanwhile, Stella's life was a masterclass in failing upward. She bounced from college to college, changing her major every semester because it was either too hard or the professors were too mean. And every time she stumbled, Howard and Evelyn were right there with an open checkbook to cushion her fall. The most glaring example happened when Stella was 22. She had been driving for less than a year when she completely totaled her car. She wrapped a red sedan around a brick mailbox because she was texting while driving. She walked away without a scratch, thank God, but the car was scrap metal. I remember thinking she would finally have to take the bus and learn a lesson. 2 weeks later, I pulled into my parents' driveway for Sunday dinner and saw a brand new, silver coupe gleaming in the afternoon sun. I walked inside and asked them how on earth they could justify buying her a new car after her sheer negligence. My mother looked at me with this patronizing, sorrowful expression that I had come to despise. She patted my arm and said, "Naomi, you have to understand. You are so strong. You are so capable and independent. Stella is delicate. She needs us. We have to help her because she cannot navigate the world the way you do." That was their ultimate justification for everything. It was the psychological foundation of their gaslighting. They genuinely convinced themselves that because I was resilient, I required absolutely nothing from them. My strength was weaponized against me. They viewed my independence not as an achievement to be celebrated, but as a convenient excuse to funnel every ounce of their love, attention, and money into Stella's endless string of failures. Over the years, I just accepted it. I stopped fighting for a place at a table where the chairs were already taken. I focused on my firm. I focused on restoring old buildings. I focused on the lake house. I was content in my isolation, believing that as long as I asked for nothing, they could take nothing from me. I was horribly, naively wrong. The catalyst for the destruction of my family arrived in the form of a man named Julian. Stella met him 2 years ago, and my parents immediately treated him like royalty. Julian was outwardly flashy. He wore tailored suits, sported a watch that cost more than my first car, and spoke in corporate buzzwords that sounded impressive but meant absolutely nothing. He was a junior executive at some obscure wealth management firm, but to Howard and Evelyn, he was the savior who was finally going to take Stella off their hands and maintain the lavish lifestyle she felt entitled to. What my parents completely ignored, or perhaps deliberately chose to overlook, was that Julian was just as hollow and financially reckless as their golden child. He leased his luxury car, rented a penthouse he could barely afford, and maxed out credit cards to maintain the illusion of extreme wealth. They were a match made in superficial heaven. When Julian proposed to Stella, the wedding planning began immediately, and it mutated from a celebration into a terrifying financial monster within weeks. Initially, Stella talked about a beautiful, elegant backyard affair. But then she started buying bridal magazines and scrolling through celebrity wedding accounts. Within a month, the guest list exploded from an intimate 100 people to an absurd 300. The venue changed from a local botanical garden to an exclusive, historic country club that required a massive 5-figure deposit just to hold the date. Stella was not just planning a wedding, she was planning a coronation. She wanted custom ice sculptures. She wanted an imported caviar bar. She wanted a 10-piece live band. I watched in quiet horror as the projected budget climbed. It went from 50,000 to 100,000 and finally settled at an astronomical $300,000. I knew my parents had decent savings, but they were not multimillionaires. Howard was a regional manager for an insurance company, and Evelyn was a retired school administrator. $300,000 was a devastating amount of money. During one particularly stressful family dinner, Evelyn was rubbing her temples, looking over a stack of floral invoices. Howard was drinking his scotch faster than usual. I decided to try and bridge the gap. I wanted to be a good sister. I leaned across the table and offered a compromise. "Look," I said gently. "I know things are getting expensive. I can write a check for $5,000 right now to cover the photographer. Or, if you want to save on venue costs, we could host the rehearsal dinner or even a pre-wedding photo shoot up at the lake house. It is beautiful up there right now." The reaction was immediate and deeply bizarre. Howard almost dropped his glass. He sat up completely straight, his face suddenly flushed red. He waved his hand aggressively, dismissing me with a harshness that took me aback. "Absolutely not," he snapped, his voice much louder than necessary. "We do not need your money, Naomi. And we certainly do not need to drag everyone up to the woods. We have the finances completely under control. Do not worry about it." Evelyn's eye twitched. She did not look at me. She stared down at her plate and nervously rearranged her peas with her fork. "Your father is right. It is all handled. Stella deserves the perfect day, and we are going to give it to her." I backed off, assuming it was just Howard's foolish pride talking. I thought he was embarrassed that his successful daughter had to offer charity. I had no idea that his defensive panic was not born out of pride, but out of guilt. I had no idea that they had already found a way to fund the $300,000 wedding, and that they had already begun the process of stealing it directly from me. The first real crack in the perfect illusion they were building happened about 4 months before the wedding. I had gone over to my parents' house for our obligatory Sunday dinner. I walked into the living room to put my coat down, and I stopped dead in my tracks. Something was wrong with the room, but it took my brain a few seconds to process exactly what it was. Above the fireplace and along the hallway wall, there were faded, rectangular shadows on the wallpaper. The large, framed family photographs that had hung there for over a decade were gone. Specifically, the photos that featured the New Hampshire lake house in the background. The picture of Grandpa Winston and me holding a massive trout on the dock. The wide shot of the cabin in the snow. They had vanished. When Evelyn walked into the room carrying a tray of appetizers, I pointed at the wall. "What happened to the pictures from the lake?" She nearly dropped the tray. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the handles, and she let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh that sounded like nails on a chalkboard. "Oh, those. I took them down. I brought them to the framing shop downtown. The old frames were looking so dated, you know? Just updating the decor." It was a flimsy lie, but I didn't push it. People do redecorate. But the atmosphere shifted completely when we sat down to eat. I was slicing a piece of chicken when I casually mentioned my upcoming plans. "I think I am going to drive up to the lake house next weekend," I said, not looking up from my plate. "I need to check the winter pipes and make sure the roof did not take any damage from that storm last week." The silence that fell over the dining room table was so heavy it felt suffocating. Howard stopped chewing. Evelyn dropped her fork, and it clattered loudly against the porcelain plate. I looked up bewildered. Evelyn was staring at Howard with wide, panicked eyes. "Oh, honey, no." Evelyn blurted out, her voice trembling slightly. "You do not need to do that. It is a long drive, and you work so hard." "It is only 2.5 hours, Mom," I replied, frowning. "And I like doing it. It is my house." "Actually," Howard interrupted, his voice tight and overly controlled. "You really shouldn't go up there. I meant to tell you. I hired a new caretaker. The old property manager, Mr. Henderson, he retired suddenly. Moved to Florida. So I hired a new guy to keep an eye on things for you. He is doing a deep clean and chemical treatment on the wood right now. It is toxic to breathe. You should stay away for at least a month." I stared at him. The lie was so incredibly elaborate and delivered with such sudden intensity that my architectural brain, the part of me that looks for structural flaws, immediately flagged it. Why would my father hire a caretaker for property he didn't own, without telling me, to do chemical treatments I never authorized? Mr. Henderson retired? I asked slowly. I just spoke to him 2 months ago. He never mentioned Florida. Well, things change fast, Howard said, taking a massive gulp of his wine. Just let the new guy do his job, Naomi. Focus on your work. I left dinner early that night. The moment I got into my car, I pulled out my phone and dialed Mr. Henderson's number. I expected him to pick up and laugh about my dad's strange story. Instead, I heard 3 harsh, electronic beeps, followed by an automated voice. The number you have reached has been disconnected or is no longer in service. I sat in the dark of my car, staring at the steering wheel. A cold, heavy dread began to pool in the bottom of my stomach. Something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. The paranoia began to gnaw at me over the next few weeks, fueled by the completely unhinged display of wealth on Stella's social media. I was sitting in my architectural firm late one evening, waiting for a rendering to render on my computer, and I mindlessly opened Instagram. Stella's page was a relentless feed of extreme extravagance. There was a photo of her in a bridal boutique holding a glass of champagne, with a caption boasting about her custom dress being flown in from Paris. That alone was easily a $15,000 to $20,000 expense. A few days later, she posted a video of a private consultation with a celebrity florist showcasing massive centerpieces of rare white orchids. Then came the announcement of their honeymoon, 3 weeks in a private, overwater bungalow in the Maldives. And the grand finale was a photo of Stella leaning against a brand-new, midnight blue BMW SUV with a giant red bow on it. An early wedding present from my amazing parents. The caption read. I stared at the screen, doing the mental math. Howard and Evelyn did not have this kind of liquid cash. Even if they drained their retirement accounts, they would never be this foolish. Where in the hell was this money coming from? Did Julian suddenly land a massive bonus? The answer, wrapped in a suffocating layer of confusion, came 3 days later. I was grabbing an iced Americano at a busy coffee shop near my office in downtown Boston. I was waiting at the pickup counter when someone bumped into my shoulder. I turned around and saw Julian. He was wearing a sharp navy suit, looking perfectly manicured and overly confident as usual. Naomi, look at you, he said loudly, his voice booming over the hum of the espresso machines. Before I could just offer a polite smile, he stepped forward and wrapped me in a tight, surprisingly aggressive hug. He squeezed my shoulders, almost causing me to spill my coffee. I stiffened, pulling back awkwardly. Hi, Julian. How are you? I am incredible. We are incredible, he beamed, his perfect white teeth flashing. He leaned in a little closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Listen, I haven't really had a chance to see you without your parents hovering around, but I just wanted to say, thank you. Seriously. From the bottom of my heart. I blinked, totally lost. Thank me for what? Julian chuckled, shaking his head as if I were being delightfully modest. For the massive contribution, Naomi. Honestly, when Stella told me what you did, it blew my mind. We were stressing about the budget for the floral arrangements and the live band, and then you just swooped in and saved the day. The wedding is going to be flawless because of you. The coffee shop around me seemed to go entirely silent. The blood rushed out of my face. My fingers went numb against my iced cup. When Stella told me what you did, my contribution, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. The words felt like ash in my mouth. Julian's smile faltered slightly, his brow furrowing. He could tell my confusion was not fake modesty. It was genuine shock. Yeah, you know, the financial help. Stella said you were incredibly generous. He took a step back, suddenly looking very uncomfortable, realizing he had stepped onto a landmine. Look, maybe I wasn't supposed to say anything. Just, thanks again. I gotta get back to the office. He practically bolted out the door, leaving me standing near the sugar packets, paralyzed. I did not give them a single dime. They rejected my $5,000 offer. So what massive financial contribution was Stella talking about? I walked out of the coffee shop, threw my full drink into a trash can, and got into my car. The silence in the cabin was deafening. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles popped. The puzzle pieces were floating around my head, the missing photos, the fake caretaker, the disconnected phone, the sudden influx of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and now my supposed generous sacrifice. I didn't want to put the pieces together. Because if I did, the picture it formed was too monstrous to comprehend. The final blow, the one that completely shattered my reality, came exactly 2 days later. It was a Tuesday morning. I was at my desk, reviewing blueprints for a historical library restoration, when my cell phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar New Hampshire area code. I answered hesitantly. Hello, Naomi? Oh, dear, it is so good to hear your voice. It was a frail, crackly voice. It took me a moment to place it. It was Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman who owned the cabin on the north side of Grandpa Winston's property. Mrs. Gable? Hi. Is everything okay? Oh, everything is fine, dear. Beautiful weather up here, she said pleasantly. I just wanted to call and say hello. I was hoping you might be coming up soon to visit the new owners. They seem like such a lovely couple. I saw them out on the dock yesterday painting the railing, and it just made me miss seeing you around. The breath was knocked out of my lungs with such force, I physically slumped forward over my desk. The edges of my vision grew dark. The new owners? I choked out, desperately trying to keep my voice steady. Mrs. Gable, what are you talking about? There was a long, awkward pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the wind rustling through the trees through her receiver. Oh my, Mrs. Gable stammered, sounding suddenly frightened. Did I speak out of turn? I just assumed, well, with the moving trucks last week and the real estate agent. I am so sorry, dear. I should go. She hung up before I could say another word. I dropped my phone onto the blueprints. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Moving trucks. Real estate agents. New owners. Panic, cold and sharp as a razor, sliced through my denial. I opened a new tab on my computer browser with shaking hands. I navigated to my primary banking portal. I had a specific, separate checking account set up solely to hold funds for the property taxes and maintenance fees for the lake house. The bills were on autopay. I rarely checked it unless I was depositing money. I typed in my username and password. The screen loaded, and a bright red banner flashed across the top of my dashboard. Alert! Suspicious activity detected. There have been 3 failed login attempts from an unrecognized device and IP address within the last 48 hours. Someone had tried to hack into the account tied to the lake house. Someone who knew the account existed, but didn't have the password. Someone trying to intercept tax documents, or worse, trying to drain the funds. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an assault. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. A terrifying, icy calm washed over me. The kind of calm that comes when you realize the people tasked with protecting you are the ones holding the knife to your back. I stood up from my desk, walked out to my assistant, and told her to cancel all my meetings for the next 2 days. I grabbed my keys, walked down to the parking garage, and got into my car. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't leave a note. I just started the engine and merged onto the highway, heading straight for New Hampshire. The 2.5-hour drive was a blur of gray asphalt and churning, violent thoughts. I was going to my sanctuary. I was going to Grandpa Winston's house. And I was prepared to burn everything to the ground if someone else was inside it. Thank you for watching halfway through the story. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with the name of the city you live in. Every comment helps the video reach a wider audience. Thank you so much. The 2.5 hours it took to drive from my office in Boston to the lake house in New Hampshire felt like an eternity. The highway stretched out in front of me like a gray ribbon, blurring at the edges as my mind raced through every terrifying scenario. I tried to apply logic to the situation. I told myself that Mrs. Gable was just confused. She was old, her eyesight was probably failing, and she had just seen a maintenance crew and mistaken them for new owners. I told myself the bank alert was a coincidence, a random phishing attempt that happened to coincide with my father's strange lies. But the architectural, analytical part of my brain knew the truth. Structures do not collapse without a reason, and the foundation of my parents' lies was cracking right in front of my eyes. I turned off the main highway onto the winding, two-lane road that led to the lake. The familiar canopy of oak and pine trees arched over the street, casting long, afternoon shadows across my windshield. I rolled down my window, expecting the crisp, clean scent of the water to calm my racing heart. It did not. As I approached the final turn onto the private dirt road that led to my property, my foot instinctively hit the brake pedal. At the entrance, nailed to a massive oak tree, there had always been a beautiful, hand-carved wooden sign that read Winston's Rest. Grandpa Winston had carved it himself 40 years ago. The sign was gone. In its place was a bright, obnoxious, modern real estate sold sign. My breath hitched in my throat. I pressed the accelerator, my tires crunching aggressively over the gravel. I rounded the final bend, and the cabin came into view. My sanctuary. My home. Parked directly in the center of the gravel driveway was a massive, white moving truck. Its back doors were wide open, and two men in matching blue uniforms were carrying a large, floral-patterned sofa up the front steps and into my living room. Standing near the porch, holding a clipboard and pointing toward the boathouse, was a middle-aged couple I had never seen before in my life. The man was wearing a polo shirt and khaki shorts, and the woman had her hair pulled back in a visor, holding a travel mug of coffee. They looked relaxed. They looked like they belonged there. I slammed my car into park, not even bothering to pull into a proper spot. I left the engine running, pushed the door open, and marched up the driveway. My legs felt like lead, but the adrenaline pumping through my veins pushed me forward. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice sharp and cutting through the quiet afternoon air. The couple turned around, looking surprised but friendly. The woman offered a warm, welcoming smile. "Oh, hello there. Are you a neighbor? We were just telling the movers we need to go introduce ourselves to the folks next door once the boxes are unpacked." I stopped a few feet away from them, my chest heaving. "No, I am not a neighbor. My name is Naomi. This is my property. What are you doing inside my house?" The friendly smiles instantly vanished from their faces, replaced by profound confusion. The man, who looked to be in his late 50s, stepped forward and instinctively positioned himself slightly in front of his wife. "I am sorry, there must be some kind of misunderstanding. I am Marcus Thorne, and this is my wife, Diane. We just bought this cabin. We closed on the property late last week, and we are moving our things in today." "You did not buy this cabin," I said, my voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of rage and panic. "Because I never sold it. This house was left to me by my grandfather. The deed is in my name. You are trespassing." Marcus and Diane exchanged a deeply concerned look. Diane lowered her coffee mug, her eyes wide. "Marcus, what is going on?" Hold on, Marcus said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Look, Naomi, I do not want any trouble, but we went through a legitimate real estate agency. We paid cash. We have a clear title and all the closing documents right here in the truck. Give me 1 second. He jogged over to the cab of the moving truck and retrieved a thick, manila folder. He walked back and handed it to me. "Look for yourself. It is all legally binding." My hands were shaking so violently I could barely open the folder. I flipped past the cover sheet, staring at the standard state real estate transfer forms. My eyes frantically scanned the text until I hit the seller information section. The names listed as the sellers were Howard and Evelyn, my parents. I stood in the driveway, the afternoon sun beating down on my shoulders, staring at the names printed in stark black ink. Howard and Evelyn. They had no legal right to this property. They were not on the deed. They were not co-signers. The only way they could have legally sold this house was if they had my explicit, notarized power of attorney, or if my signature was on the deed transfer. I flipped to the third page, the actual transfer of deed. And there it was. At the bottom of the page, next to the date, were 3 signatures. The first was my father's messy scrawl. The second was my mother's neat, cursive handwriting. And the third was supposed to be mine. It was a forgery. And it was not even a particularly good one. The N in Naomi was slanted at the wrong angle, lacking the sharp, architectural precision I naturally used when I wrote. The loop on the M was too wide. It was an imitation drawn by someone who had watched me sign birthday cards for years, but did not understand the muscle memory of my own hand. Next to the forged signature was a blue notary stamp, making the document officially, legally binding in the eyes of the state. I looked at the final sale price listed on the next page. $300,000. Paid in full. Cash transaction. A rapid close. They had sold my grandfather's legacy for $300,000, an amount that was easily $150,000 below the actual market value of the waterfront property. They had liquidated it for fast cash. Exactly enough to pay for Stella's ridiculous royal wedding. Naomi? Are you all right? You look like you are going to pass out, Diane said, stepping closer, her voice thick with genuine maternal concern. I looked up from the papers. The world around me felt entirely detached, like I was watching a movie of my own life playing out on a screen. This is a forged document, I whispered, the words scraping against my throat. My parents forged my signature. They stole my house. Marcus turned pale. Are you absolutely sure? We wired the money to the escrow account last Tuesday. The title company cleared it. I am sure, I said. I carefully closed the folder and handed it back to Marcus. My architectural training kicked in, the part of me that knew how to compartmentalize a crisis and assess structural damage. I could not collapse here. Not in front of these strangers who were, ultimately, just innocent victims caught in my family's crossfire. Mr. Thorne, Mrs. Thorne, I said, forcing a terrifyingly calm neutrality into my voice. I am so incredibly sorry that you have been dragged into this. But you need to know that this sale is fraudulent. I am going to contact my attorney immediately. I suggest you contact the title insurance company and whoever represented you in this sale. I will not ask you to leave today, but this house does not belong to you. I turned around and walked back to my car before they could ask another question. I got into the driver's seat, rolled up the windows, locked the doors, and completely broke down. I gripped the steering wheel and screamed until my vocal cords felt like sandpaper. I sobbed with a violence that made my chest ache. I wasn't just crying for the loss of the property. I was mourning the total, irreversible death of my family. The people who brought me into this world, the people who were supposed to protect me, had looked me in the eye at Sunday dinner, smiled, told me to focus on my work, and then methodically stabbed me in the back. They didn't just steal money. They stole Grandpa Winston. They stole the only place on earth where I felt safe. After 20 minutes of uncontrollable crying, the tears stopped. The sorrow evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard, unyielding rage. I wiped my face, put the car in drive, and drove straight to the county clerk's office in the nearest town. I walked into the sterile, fluorescent-lit building and requested the public property records for my parcel. The clerk printed them out. It was all there in the permanent public record. The title had officially transferred to Marcus and Diane Thorne. The money had been dispersed to an account controlled by Howard and Evelyn. The crime was complete. I drove back to Boston that same evening and went straight to the offices of Miller and Associates. Veronica Miller was not just a brilliant real estate attorney, she was a bulldog in a tailored suit, and she had handled the legal formation of my architectural firm years ago. I sat in her plush leather chair and laid out the timeline, the forged documents, the bank alert, and the absurd wedding budget. Veronica listened in absolute silence, her pen tapping rhythmically against her legal pad. When I finished, she let out a long, heavy breath. Naomi, Veronica said quietly, looking me dead in the eye. What your parents have done is not a civil dispute. This is not a family misunderstanding. This is felony forgery. It is wire fraud. It is grand larceny. They bypassed title checks by finding a dirty notary or forging the stamp themselves, and they sold an asset they did not own. We can call the police right now. They will be arrested before the week is over. I sat perfectly still, listening to the hum of the city traffic outside her office window. I pictured Howard being led out of his suburban home in handcuffs. I pictured Evelyn crying in the back of a squad car. I pictured Stella's perfect $300,000 wedding imploding into a massive public scandal. And then I pictured the narrative my parents would spin. If I blew this up right now, for months before the wedding, I would be the villain. My parents would cry to our extended family, claiming they were just trying to secure a loan and made a desperate, stupid mistake for love. They would say Naomi is a monster for sending her own parents to jail over money. Stella would sob about her ruined wedding, and somehow I would be positioned as the cold, heartless, greedy sister who destroyed the family. They would have time to hide the money, hire defense attorneys, and manipulate the situation. No, I said, my voice eerily calm. Veronica raised an eyebrow. No? Naomi, they stole $500,000 worth of real estate from you. I know, I replied, leaning forward and resting my forearms on her desk. But if I strike now, they will find a way to make themselves the victims. They always do. I am not going to give them the opportunity to play defense. So, what do you want to do? I want to let them have the wedding, I said, a dark smile pulling at the corner of my mouth. I want them to spend every single dime of that $300,000. I want them to sign contracts with the florists, the caterers, and the luxury resort. I want Stella to put on that $15,000 dress and walk down the aisle. I want them to stand in front of 300 people and pretend they are the perfect, wealthy family. Veronica stared at me, a glimmer of profound respect shining in her eyes. You want to wait until the money is gone. Exactly, I said. Right now, they have cash. If we sue them, they give the cash back. It is a clean break. But if they spend the cash on non-refundable wedding expenses, and then I invalidate the fraudulent house sale, they will be legally required to refund the buyers, the Thorns, out of their own pockets. They will have to liquidate their retirement accounts. They will lose their own house to pay off the debt they owe for stealing mine. And they will face the felony charges without a dime to their name to fight it. Veronica leaned back in her chair, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. You are a very scary woman, Naomi. I love it. We build the case in absolute silence, I instructed. We gather every piece of evidence. We find out who forged that notary stamp. We trace the wire transfers from the escrow account directly to the wedding vendors. We prepare the lawsuit, the injunctions, and the criminal referral to the district attorney. And we sit on it. We wait. And when do we drop the bomb? Veronica asked, uncapping her pen. The morning after the wedding, I said coldly. Once the marriage certificate is signed and the honeymoon bags are packed. That is when we burn their house down. 2 months later, I found myself standing in the grand ballroom of a luxury hotel in downtown Boston, attending Stella and Julian's engagement party. The sheer scale of the event was nauseating. The room was draped in white silk, illuminated by 3 massive crystal chandeliers. Waiters in white gloves circulated through the crowd of 150 guests, carrying silver trays of caviar on toast points and glasses of vintage champagne. In the center of the room, positioned like a monument to their vanity, was a towering ice sculpture carved into the shape of 2 swans forming a heart. I stood near the edge of the dance floor, holding a glass of sparkling water, performing the mental calculus of betrayal. The ice sculpture? That was the oak flooring in the kitchen. The imported caviar? That was the stained glass window Grandpa Winston had installed in the master bedroom. The string quartet playing softly in the corner? That was the boathouse. I was watching my inheritance being eaten, drank, and melted away in real time. Stella spotted me and practically floated across the room. She was wearing a designer cocktail dress that sparkled under the lights. She grabbed my hands, pulling me into an overly dramatic, perfumed embrace. Naomi, you look so beautiful. Are you having the best time? Is this not the most magical night ever? She squealed, oblivious to the fact that she was standing on a foundation built entirely on theft. It is certainly extravagant, Stella, I said, keeping my smile perfectly fixed. You must be very happy. I am. And Julian and I are just so incredibly blessed, she gushed, looking around the room as if she owned the hotel. Before I could excuse myself, the string quartet stopped playing. Howard stepped up to a microphone near the ice sculpture, tapping a silver spoon against his champagne flute. The room quieted down, all eyes turning to the patriarch of the perfect family. Evelyn stood next to him, beaming with pride, her arm linked through Julian's. Family, friends, thank you all for being here tonight. Howard's voice echoed through the ballroom, smooth and confident. Evelyn and I are overwhelmed with joy to celebrate the upcoming union of our beautiful daughter Stella and the man we already consider a son, Julian. A polite round of applause rippled through the crowd. Planning a wedding of this magnitude is no small feat, Howard continued, placing a hand over his heart. It takes a village. It takes love. And most importantly, it takes family stepping up for each other. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd until they locked directly onto me. And there is one person we need to thank above all others tonight. My oldest daughter, Naomi. The spotlight of 150 pairs of eyes swung toward me. I froze, my grip tightening on my glass. Naomi made a breathtakingly generous sacrifice to ensure her sister could have the wedding of her dreams, Howard proclaimed, his voice thick with fake emotion. She selflessly contributed the proceeds from the sale of our family lake house. She knew how much this day meant to Stella, and she put sisterly love above her own property. To Naomi. Howard raised his glass high in the air. Evelyn raised hers, tears glistening in her eyes. To sisterly love, they echoed in unison. The entire room erupted into applause. Julian shot me a brilliant, thankful smile. Stella blew me a kiss. People standing near me patted me on the shoulder, murmuring compliments about what an amazing sister I was. It was psychological warfare. They were not just stealing my money, they were forcing me to be complicit in the theft. They were trapping me in a public lie, betting on the fact that I was too polite, too reserved, to scream the truth in front of high society. They wanted me to bow my head and accept the role they had written for me. I looked at my father. I looked at the smug, self-satisfied glint in his eye. He thought he had won. He thought he had outsmarted me. I did not break character. I did not throw my drink in his face. I simply raised my glass of sparkling water, looked directly into Howard's eyes, and offered a slow, chilling smile. I nodded once, acknowledging the toast. Let them drink. Let them celebrate. The poison was already in the cup. They just didn't know it yet. The engagement party dragged on. I navigated the room like a ghost, dodging conversations where possible, but inevitably, I was cornered near the extravagant dessert buffet by my Aunt Patricia. Patricia was Evelyn's older sister, the family gossip, a woman who thrived on drama and traded secrets like currency. Naomi, sweetheart, Patricia cooed, linking her arm through mine in a vice grip. That was such a beautiful toast your father gave. I have to admit, I was so surprised when Evelyn told me you decided to sell the lake house. I kept my expression entirely neutral, picking up a chocolate truffle. Oh? What exactly did Evelyn tell you, Aunt Patricia? Patricia leaned in, lowering her voice as if we were sharing state secrets. Well, you know how your mother worries. She said you came to them a few months ago, completely stressed out. She said the upkeep on the cabin was distracting you from your architectural firm, and the property taxes were just draining your accounts. She told me you practically begged Howard to handle the sale for you because you couldn't bear the emotional burden of clearing out Winston's things. I chewed the truffle slowly, letting the bitter chocolate mask the taste of pure bile rising in my throat. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. They had not merely kept the theft a secret, they had engineered a massive, proactive gaslighting campaign. They painted me as a stressed-out, overwhelmed career woman who needed her big, strong father to swoop in and relieve her of a financial burden. It was a masterclass in manipulation. It protected their image while simultaneously erasing any guilt they might feel. If I was begging them to sell it, then taking the money wasn't theft, it was a service. Is that right? I murmured, wiping my fingers on a napkin. Mom always did have a vivid imagination when it came to my stress levels. She just loves you girls, Patricia sighed happily, looking across the room to where Evelyn was holding court with Julian's wealthy parents. And to take that money and give it to Stella for the wedding? You are a saint, Naomi. A literal saint. I am just making sure everyone gets exactly what they deserve, I replied smoothly. Later that evening, as the party began to wind down, I found Evelyn standing alone near the coat check. She was wrapping a cashmere shawl around her shoulders, looking exhausted but triumphant. Mom, I said, stepping up behind her. She jumped slightly, startled, but quickly recovered, pasting on a bright, tight smile. Naomi, you are leaving so soon? Did you have a good time? The food was incredible, wasn't it? The caviar was excellent, I said quietly. I stepped a little closer to her, dropping my voice so only she could hear. I just wanted to say goodnight. And I wanted to let you know how much I appreciated Dad's toast. Evelyn's eyes darted around nervously, checking to see if anyone was within earshot. Well, you know your father. He likes to make a fuss. But we do appreciate your understanding, Naomi. We really do. When all this wedding madness is over, we will sit down and figure out a way to make it up to you. I promise. It was the closest she had come to admitting guilt, a pathetic little breadcrumb of an apology designed to keep me quiet for a few more months. I reached out and gently smoothed a wrinkle on the lapel of her expensive coat. There is no need to make anything up to me, Mom. I am handling my own affairs. Just make sure you and Dad check your mail the day after the wedding. I am sending you a very special gift. Evelyn frowned, clearly confused by my tone. A gift? Oh, you don't need to do that, sweetheart. You have already done enough. I insist, I said, my voice cold and hollow. It is something you will never forget. Enjoy the rest of the planning, Mom. I walked out of the hotel into the cool Boston night air, leaving her standing there with a bewildered look on her face. The 3 months leading up to the wedding were the most surreal period of my life. I existed in 2 completely separate realities. In the public reality, I was the perfect, supportive older sister and dutiful maid of honor. I attended bridal showers where I smiled and drank mimosas while Stella ripped open boxes of crystal vases and designer cookware. I went to the bachelorette party, sitting quietly in the corner of a VIP club booth while Stella and her friends drank $300 bottles of vodka. I even endured the final bridesmaid dress fitting. I remember standing on a circular pedestal in a high-end boutique, completely surrounded by mirrors. The seamstress was pinning the hem of my dress, a pale, blush pink silk gown that cost nearly $2,000. Stella was sitting on a velvet couch, sipping champagne, complaining that the florist was trying to charge an extra $5,000 for a rare type of imported lily. Just put it on Dad's card, Stella sighed dismissively. He said the budget is flexible. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I looked at my face. I looked calm. I looked normal. But beneath the silk dress and the polite smile, I was a loaded gun, just waiting for the trigger to be pulled. I realized in that moment that I did not love my sister anymore. The bond was dead. She was a parasite, happily feeding off a host she didn't care to understand. In my private reality, I was an executioner sharpening her axe. Veronica and I worked tirelessly. We hired a private investigator who tracked down the notary whose stamp was on the fraudulent deed. As we suspected, it was a rogue employee at a title agency who Howard had bribed with $10,000 in cash to stamp the document without me being present. We secured a sworn, taped confession from the notary in exchange for leniency in our civil suit against her. We subpoenaed the bank records of the escrow account. The paper trail was devastatingly clear. The $300,000 from the sale of the lake house dropped into my parents' joint account on a Tuesday. By Thursday, $40,000 was wired to the country club for the venue deposit. By the following Monday, $20,000 was wired to the florist and $15,000 to the bridal boutique in Paris. They didn't even try to wash the money. It was a direct, undeniable line from my stolen property to Stella's vanity. 2 nights before the wedding, I sat alone in the dark of my apartment. Only the glow of my laptop illuminated the room. It was time to write the manifesto. I opened a blank document and titled it, Notice of fraudulent sale and criminal intent. But I didn't write it in legal jargon. Veronica was handling the lawsuit. This letter was personal. It was the eulogy for my family. I wrote to Howard and Evelyn. I detailed exactly how and when I discovered the forgery. I listed the exact IP addresses they used when they tried to hack my tax account. I broke down the mathematics of their betrayal, listing the specific wedding expenses that correlated with the stolen funds. You believed my independence meant I required no loyalty, I typed, my fingers hitting the keys with heavy, rhythmic strikes. You believed that because I built my own life, you were entitled to tear it down to pave the road for Stella. You did not just steal a house. You stole Grandpa Winston. You stole my trust. You committed a felony. I sat in silence for months, watching you spend my money, watching you lie to our relatives, watching you toast to a sisterly love that you murdered. The wedding is over. The money is gone. I am taking my property back. The attached documents are from my attorney. Prepare to lose everything you own to pay back the innocent people you defrauded. Do not call me. Do not text me. You are no longer my family. I attached the PDF of the letter to an email draft. I attached the massive, 50-page legal binder Veronica had prepared, which included the lawsuit to invalidate the property sale, the criminal referral draft for the district attorney, and the sworn confession of the notary. I entered Howard's, Evelyn's, and Stella's email addresses in the recipient line. I scheduled the email to automatically send at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning on the Sunday following the wedding. I closed the laptop, walked into my bedroom, and finally slept a full 8 hours. The wedding day arrived, and it was a grotesque masterpiece of excess. The historic country club was transformed into a pseudo-royal palace. 300 guests, dressed in black tie attire, watched as Stella floated down an aisle covered in imported white rose petals. She looked like a princess. Julian looked like a prince. Howard walked her down the aisle, tears streaming down his face, playing the role of the proud, providing father to perfection. Evelyn sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. During the reception, they served a 5-course meal featuring Wagyu beef and butter poached lobster. At 10 o'clock at night, the band stopped playing, and the guests were ushered out to the grand terrace. We stood under the stars as a $20,000 fireworks display erupted over the golf course, perfectly synchronized to a soaring orchestral soundtrack. I stood in the back of the crowd, watching the explosions of gold and crimson light up the night sky. Each burst of light was thousands of dollars burning away into ash and smoke. I watched Stella and Julian kissing under the fireworks, holding champagne flutes. I felt absolutely nothing. No sadness, no anger. Just cold, clinical finality. The next morning, I woke up at 8:30 in my hotel room. I ordered room service, poured a cup of black coffee, and sat on the edge of the bed with my phone in my hand. At exactly 9 o'clock, the scheduled email was sent. At exactly 9:15, the courier Veronica hired pulled up to my parents' house in the suburbs and hand-delivered the physical copies of the legal binders, requiring a signature from Howard. I took a sip of my coffee and waited. At 9:20, my phone began to vibrate violently on the nightstand. The caller ID flashed, Dad. I watched it ring until it went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, it rang again. Mom. I let it go to voicemail. Within 10 minutes, I had 15 missed calls and a barrage of texts. Naomi, what is this? Call me right now. Naomi, please pick up the phone. There is a misunderstanding. We can fix this. Naomi, you cannot do this to us. Call me now. I did not read the voicemails. I opened my phone settings and blocked both of their numbers. At 10:30, a new number popped up. It was an international number. Stella. She and Julian were supposed to be boarding a first-class flight to the Maldives for their 3-week, over-water bungalow honeymoon. I answered on the third ring. Hello, Stella. What the hell did you do? Stella shrieked into the phone. The background noise sounded like a busy airport terminal. She was hyperventilating, her voice shrill and panicked. Julian's credit cards were just declined at the first-class lounge. The bank said the accounts are frozen. Mom is having a panic attack, Dad is screaming at some lawyer on the phone, and they're saying you are suing them. How could you ruin my honeymoon? Even now, even when the truth was laid out in black and white, Stella's only concern was her luxury vacation. I did not ruin anything, Stella, I said, my voice dangerously calm and flat. Mom and Dad committed felony forgery. They stole my house, sold it illegally, and used the stolen money to pay for your caviar and your fireworks. My lawyers have frozen their accounts to secure the funds to pay back the people they defrauded. But they said you gave them the house. Stella cried, sobbing loudly. You were just being a jealous, vindictive bitch because I got married. Check your email, Stella, I replied coldly. Read the police confession from the notary. They lied to you. And if Julian's accounts are frozen, it means the bank suspects he was complicit in receiving stolen funds. Have a safe flight back to reality. I hung up the phone. I powered the device completely off, tossed it into my purse, and walked out of the hotel. It was over. The legal fallout was swift, brutal, and totally uncompromising. 3 days later, I sat in Veronica's conference room. Howard and Evelyn sat across the long mahogany table. They looked like they had aged 10 years in 72 hours. Howard's face was gray and sunken. Evelyn was physically trembling, her eyes red and swollen from crying. They had brought a cheap defense attorney with them, a man who looked completely out of his depth. Veronica laid out the terms with the precision of a surgeon amputating a limb. The civil court had already placed emergency injunctions on all of my parents' assets. Here is the reality of your situation, Veronica said, leaning forward. The sale of the New Hampshire property is legally void due to felony forgery. The title reverts back to Naomi immediately. However, you accepted $300,000 from Marcus and Diane Thorne. You spent that money. You now owe the Thornes $300,000, plus their legal fees, moving costs, and emotional distress damages. Howard buried his face in his hands, letting out a pathetic, broken sob. We don't have it. The money is gone. The wedding, it took everything. Then you will sell your house, I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was devoid of any sympathy. You will liquidate your 401ks. You will drain your savings. You will pay back the Thornes every single cent, or my lawyer hands the criminal referral directly to the district attorney, and I will personally testify against you in criminal court for forgery and wire fraud. Evelyn looked at me, her face contorted in agony. Naomi, please. We are your parents. We made a terrible mistake. We just wanted Stella to be happy. Please don't destroy us. You destroyed yourselves, Mom, I said, standing up from the table. You chose Stella's happiness over my basic human rights. You treated me like a bank account to be hacked. You are not my parents anymore. You are just criminals who got caught. I walked out of the room, leaving them to sign the settlement papers that would bankrupt them for the rest of their lives. It took 6 months for the legal mess to fully clear. My parents were forced to sell their suburban home at a massive loss to pay back the Thornes and avoid a prison sentence. They moved into a tiny, cramped apartment in a bad part of town. Howard had a nervous breakdown and lost his managerial job. Stella and Julian's marriage survived less than a year. Once Julian realized the endless bank of Howard and Evelyn was closed, and that Stella expected a lifestyle he couldn't afford on credit, they filed for a bitter, messy divorce. I never spoke to any of them again. A year after the wedding, on a quiet, cool afternoon in early autumn, I drove back up to New Hampshire. The drive felt different this time. The air in the car wasn't thick with panic, it was light. I pulled onto the gravel driveway. The ugly real estate sign was gone. I walked up the wooden steps, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside. The cabin smelled like dust and old pine. It was empty, quiet, and completely mine. I walked through the living room, running my hand along the rough-hewn logs that Grandpa Winston had cut and stacked with his own 2 hands. I walked out onto the back deck and down to the wooden dock extending into the lake. I sat down on the edge, taking off my shoes and letting my feet dangle just above the cold, dark blue water. The wind rustled through the pine trees, sounding like a deep, slow breath. I looked out across the vast expanse of the lake. I had lost the family I was born into, but sitting there on the dock my grandfather built, I realized something important. A foundation built on lies will always eventually collapse. But a foundation built on truth, on hard work, and on self-respect, that can weather any storm. I was the architect of my own life now, and for the first time in 34 years, the structure was perfectly sound. Am I wrong for letting them go through with the wedding before dropping the lawsuit, or should I have stopped them the moment I found out? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now to join our community and share your thoughts in the comments below.